Hello, and welcome to the Stellar Open Protocol discussion. In these meetings, we discuss core advancement proposals, aka CAPs, which are technical specs that suggest changes to the Stellar protocol. They're necessary to allow the protocol to continue to evolve to meet the needs of the ecosystem. So we live stream these meetings so that anyone who's interested can follow along. Although I do want to note it is a technical discussion. So if you're watching, you may want to take a look at the CAP linked to in the show description. There's also a description in the description, all the participants are listed. We do keep an eye on sort of the dialogue that's happening in the chat box, but the goal really is to talk through questions about the CAP that we're discussing, which is CAP 42. So we will only really address questions if they're directly related to that goal, but we will collect them and take a look at them later too. Today, the CAP we're discussing is CAP 42, titled Multi-Part Transaction Sets. It suggests a mechanism that makes it possible to implement different fee structures based on transaction set composition. So currently in transaction set composition, it can sometimes be heavily biased towards undesirable behaviors, including spikes of arbitrage trades that eventually fail. This CAP basically empowers validators to isolate subsets of transactions that can compete on fees without causing overall fees to increase. And it also makes it possible to expand policies to other dimensions in the future. So CAP 42. Again, it's linked to. Before this meeting, CAP 42 was drafted. That's the link to it there. It was also discussed on the mailing list, and there's a link to the thread to that discussion thread as well. So our goal today is really just to see if there are any blockers that would prevent us from moving it forward to the next step of its life cycle. And I will stop talking, and I'm going to turn it over to Nico, who is the original author of this CAP, to see sort of what, if he has any questions that he wants addressed by this meeting. Nico, take it away.
Hi, you can hear me? All right. So yeah, I'm happy that I got to get CAP 42 because, you know, it is the answer to everything, of course. And in particular, the problem with fees and overloaded networks in some ways that we're not necessarily happy with. And when I say we here, it's the community that has been also complaining quite a bit about the number of failed transactions or like patterns that are just not the type of patterns we want to see on the network. So anyways, like maybe a little additional background that is not in the CAP itself is that it's actually on the dev mailing list, but not in the CAP, is that as part of this, we actually had to roll out some changes to overlay back in December that were dropping based on a heuristic, what we think are likely to be arbitrage trades, and which mitigated to a certain extent some of the things that we were seeing at the time, but that has a lot of undesirable properties. And I think as part of CAP 42, my hope is that we can actually go and fix some of those aspects that we introduced at the time. So in particular, like the type of aspect I'm looking forward to fix here is, and this is actually true in all networks, like it's not actually a Stellar specific type of problem. There has been discussions in the past few months on Ethereum and Solana, like to name a couple, on changing fee structures when it comes to this kind of spam. And when I say spam here, I mean, it's kind of a funny thing, but it's basically like a natural thing that happens, I guess, when you have an opportunity for somebody to make money, is based on the cost that you have to submit transactions. If you can make, let's say, $1,000 on a trade, well, you'd be okay actually to pay $900 in fees because you still make some money. Obviously, this is where like the way you can end up with. And at the same time, if all the transactions on the network are kind of derived on those type of fees, then it kind of kills off a whole category of other use cases that you want the network to have. So, for example, payments or like simple airdrops or whatever like people want to do that that are actually unrelated to those to this type of trading activity. So, anyways, that's for the background on why this cap. And yeah, so like I don't know if people had time to look over in more detail at the refreshed cap that I updated yesterday. Like it has actually two parts to it. There's one part that is extending the what is attached to a transaction set, basically, so that we can add like new properties to the transaction set. And the second part is actually the actual reason for this cap, which is changing how fees get calculated within a transaction set.
Sorry, is the latest version the one that's in the master branch in the repo 22 hours ago? Okay, good.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and I'm sure there are typos because I kind of updated it quickly yesterday to make sure that people had time to have access to it. But it's an early draft.
Tomer, did you raise a hand?
Yes, I did raise a hand. I tried to be polite, but Nico didn't see. So first of all, I think this is pretty cool because it takes advantage of something that's unique to the Stellar ecosystem, and like we can actually prioritize transactions not only based on fees. This is very different in other ecosystems because you know, validators are kind of like incentivized by transaction rewards, so they don't have the motivation to actually push these kind of changes. It's pretty cool. Nico, I'd like to hear your take on, we've been talking a lot about strategy for 2022 recently, and things like SpeedX and things like smart contracts in the future. These are like, you know, more transaction engines or like transactors. How will CAP 42 interact with these, or how do you think it'll interact with these features?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think this is actually in line with when I wrote it. I thought that we would actually over time kind of create more fee lanes, or for lack of better words. So an example of a fee lane that I think would make complete sense is to have a separate lane for SpeedX trades, given that they are a lot more efficient compared to existing DEX operations. And yeah, we basically say, okay, if you have the choice between a SpeedX trade and a submitted a managed offer to the network, you're going to go and have more space basically on that ledger for a SpeedX trade. And for smart contracts, I mean, it's it gets I think a little more complicated when we talk about smart contracts. Like a very primitive version of this would be, well, we are going to maybe create a lane just for smart contracts. That would be like a simple first step. Obviously, there might be more interesting things that can be done on that front, but at the minimum, it would be, you would create a different kind of fee regime, right, for smart contracts.
I mean, I guess the thing is, it seems like not really optimal for those use cases. Like in those use cases, it would be much better to just partition the transactions, because you could, you know, then you could just, you might want to, for example, say that all the smart contracts get executed like after all the regular operations, right? So just kind of having these like intermingled, like this index set just seems like it's going to add a lot of overhead and not be, you know, what you would want.
Right.
So I kind of have two reservations about this, right? One is that it just seems like a little bit too complicated for what we really need, especially if you want to start having, blocks with like 100,000 transactions, for example, which would be like totally doable with something like SpeedX if they were all SpeedX transactions, right? Like you're not going to want to also have an added overhead of like sanity checking these index checks and whatever. You're just going to want to blast through your array of SpeedX trades and do like a parallel execution of those. And I guess the second thing that like bugs me a little bit about this, it just seems like very indirect, right? Like either we believe that Dutch auctions are the right thing or we don't, right? And maybe Dutch auctions aren't the right thing. But what we're sort of trying to say, like, well, we're sort of going to keep the Dutch auction, but we're sort of not, because we're going to let validators really kind of pick and choose different sets of transactions that are going to pay different fees. And I think the reason is because we want to filter out spam. So like that is a form of censorship. Maybe it's okay, but like maybe we should just like be a little bit more direct and say like validators should, we're going to just have a way for like different validators to like filter out certain transactions that we don't think are productive. And to the extent that you might not want that. You might want to say, well, what if my transaction is like really, really important? Then I should be able to like pay a high fee and like get it in. The problem is that this doesn't actually solve that problem, right? Because I could put a maximum fee of, 2 to the 32 lumens in my transaction, but a validator who wants to censor me could like put me in my own group with a very low base fee and then put everybody else in a group with a higher base fee. And it'll look like, like the block with that transaction will like not compare favorably potentially to other blocks. So, or I mean, whatever, you could just like filter out the transaction anyway. So I don't see, this doesn't seem like as much, it seems like this is partly to solve a problem, but also partly to, I don't know, like to appear to be preserving the Dutch auction when we're not. And if we're going to have some extensible way for validators to filter out transactions, why don't we just do that in a more straightforward way?
Well, so first of all, like when you say like we're not preserving the auction mechanism here, what I'm saying is that validators, when they nominate those transaction sets, the expectation is that they would actually be doing this type of auction in any given group.
But they can choose the groups. They might as well not. You might as well just let validators choose the fee for every transaction, and just as long as
it's the same thing. Yeah, you can do that.
Straightforward thing. Just annotate each transaction with the fee that with like a 32-bit number that's like or 64.
Right.
With the,
that was exactly my proposal on the mailing list. Actually, was to just annotate every transaction with the fee.
Yeah.
But that's that's actually even less transparent in terms of what the intent is. So that's why I didn't do that.
That's effectively what you're doing.
Properties. Yeah, no, I know I'm doing that. Like I'm basically allowing for this, but I don't want people to be doing like arbitrary fee structure per transaction.
But that's what you're enabling, right? You're just making.
I'm enabling. I know it's being enabled, but that's not what we don't expect validator to do that. And actually, there's a discussion in the later in the document that talks about because like basically today validators can already censor quite a bit like what gets into a transaction set. So the example of like following the fee structure today is already not exactly right. Like if validators don't want to do it, they just don't do it. Yeah, like here what I'm trying to promote is more of a compact, I guess, like those indexes thing. I agree this could be done maybe in a slightly different way. I was trying to preserve the transaction set itself, like the existing transaction sets.
But that's not good either. If it turns out that we want to like actually change the order in which we execute transactions, then like preserving the transaction set isn't actually that useful.
Right. We already, so for SpeedX, what is in the current proposal is to just like we partition on type, and it's actually not. We actually keep the transaction set as it is, like from a serialized version. because we can always partition after the fact.
Yeah, but it just seems more useful to have it partitioned ahead of time. If you have sort of like just totally different phases of block execution, I see no benefit to intermingling transactions from the different phases.
That's true.
So, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is like, this will get the job done, but I can think of sort of much simpler ways of getting the job done. And it seems like this cap is too concerned with sort of like appearances, and those appearances, you know, effectively don't matter when what you're doing is equivalent to something where whatever validator wins nomination can just like literally set the fee for every transaction. So like, if we're going to give validators that power, let's just be upfront about it.
I mean, I thought it was pretty upfront. I was optimizing again for like ease of audit and like maybe like more compact potentially format, but
that's true. It could be more compact, or it could be less compact, depending on how many.
Well, if you have an extension point per transaction, you at least have an integer now per transaction additional.
Well, you could just change the transaction set format and add like a 4-byte fee that, you know.
No, but then it's less expensive. Like
David, can you articulate your alternative for a second so that we're all on the same page?
But the thing is that what we're discussing here is more like, we're actually not discussing. I think we're discussing more like the format of the transaction set. We're actually not talking. I don't think we are discussing. And maybe we should start with that. The premise of allowing to control fees, right? Because I think that's the important one.
I mean, I guess I can see two. I can see. I don't have a particular sort of alternative proposal, because it seems like we're trying to do two different things, and those might be better served by like two different mechanisms that are, you know, the sum of which is like maybe less complicated or more efficient to implement than this, right? So the first thing that we want is kind of multi-phase block execution down the line. So we'd like to lay the groundwork for things like SpeedX and smart contracts and stuff to coexist with a legacy Stellar transaction format. And then the second thing that we want is we want to like weed out spam, or, you know, transactions that are gonna fail a lot. And so I just think, you know, these could be handled in two separate ways, right? If we want to have multi-phase blocks, let's just have multiple phases in the blocks and potentially have like fees per phase. And if we want to weed out spam, then let's just, you know, have a way to weed out spam. And, you know, regardless of fees, we can just weed out the transactions.
But that's kind of what, like that without spam, without doing it via fees, is kind of what we're doing now, and it's actually very hard to keep up with whatever people do. Like you know, people are very clever.
Right.
They will find better ways to get around it.
Is this,
at the end,
what power does this give us to weed out spam that we don't have in the existing consensus layer? In other words, I agree that we want to be able to kind of unilaterally update update Stellar Core without going through the transaction layer, or like, you know, eventually have like a configurable algorithm to weed out spam potentially, and maybe different validators have different mechanisms. But I don't see how this change to the consensus layer actually gives us more power to do that. It may give us some sort of plausible deniability or something that we're...
No, it actually gives quite a bit of new superpowers to the network, because like I was saying earlier, like if I have an arbitrage trade where I can make $1,000, ideally I would want people to actually pay up to $1,000 in fees if they are really serious about that transaction. Right now, they don't. That's not what happens, because they're actually competing with the entire pool of transactions, and they are filling up entire ledgers, and then the ledger fees go up to, okay, $20, you know, for a transaction. But that's not $1,000, but that's still ridiculously high. And $20 is not the number. I think it was like what we saw was close to $5, I think, per transaction.
So your point is you want the spam, you just don't want it to be as profitable. Like if someone can do like
no, I want, yeah, that's kind of the idea here is that like in the current proposal, I'm saying, well, any DEX, any operation that may cross an offer is going to be put in a separate bin. And then that bin, we do this, the action system on that. So, and then if you're not interacting with the DEX, then you're in the general group. So it's, that's like first step. Like, we can probably do much better than this, but
So why don't we just throw in phases and say that, like.
But that's what I'm saying. That's already what I'm saying. It's
sorry, but I'm saying instead of indexes, let's just have straight up phases and let's just execute them in, like such that like the DEX operations.
Oh, like you would want also execution order to change? I mean, like,
yeah, because
that's
like,
fine.
We want to like segregating order is going to lay the groundwork for parallelization, right? And so if we're going to do a change like this or segregating operations, eventually we're going to want sort of the commutative operations in one group and the non-commutative in another. And so the legacy DEX operations are exactly the ones never going to be able to make commutative.
Yeah, like, but like I think the issue here, if we have groups in. Like impact somehow apply order, like because we can have transactions with multiple operations, I think you can basically use that to your advantage to maybe get executed in front of somebody else just because you happen to have the right operation.
No, it's because you don't. We'll say that we'll flag certain operations like path payment and manage offer and whatever, and say that these there's a first phase. Which might have a lower fee, but in order to get into the first phase, there's certain operations that are off limit, like the ones that we can't necessarily make efficient. And then in the second phase, you can have arbitrary.
But that, like, my point is that this forces to think about those fee lanes or whatever have to be somehow completely independent or something like. And I'm not sure it's you can always claim that.
Not necessarily. You could have
like like I can see like for SpeedX, like things like that. Yes, that makes total sense. For the existing transaction subsystem, I don't know if
well, I think if
limit ourselves
we're going to want to have like fast payments and faster payments than we can do order book operations. So to if we're going to be making this change, like why not make it in a way that will kind of facilitate that future where maybe payment processing could be parallelized even if order book processing can't be.
It's more like I think of this as it may be a multidimensional thing for fees, and then how do you turn that into something that makes sense from an ordering point of view, right? That's kind of the part I don't understand.
Leave it as open-ended as the current draft. You could just say that we're going to.
You can't do that if there are groups.
Sorry?
I think if you say there are groups, if you're linking the groups to
apply
execution or you have apply order groups.
Yeah, and so each group has a different apply order and a different fee structure, and then we can kind of have different rules for different groups. If you want to execute early and fast, then you should have a transaction that goes in one group. I think we could also. I mean, it might be worth considering. If we're changing the fee structure anyway, to have a separate base fee for successful versus failed transactions, right?
No, that is wrong. Like that doesn't work. Like I don't see like.
Why doesn't it work?
It makes things so complicated in the existing transaction subsystem that.
We've talked about that one a couple times before.
It
would be pretty tricky.
Yeah. It's super complicated because you can merge accounts. That's kind of one of the, for example, one of the things that can happen. You have to refund people at the end. It's kind of crazy stuff. And it doesn't, and this actually doesn't solve the it's not that we want to penalize failing transactions so much.
If you're going to have buckets, the buckets there could be more granularity on the fee, but that's fine. I believe you that would be too hard to implement.
For me, the most interesting question was your first question, David, which was just like, do we believe in the Dutch auction still?
Right.
Like, let's just like start with that. Like, do we think that even works? Like, do we think that is a system that is a good system for blockchains? Because like we thought that, like in 2018, well, maybe 2018 us was wrong, right? Like I wouldn't deny that 2018 me was wrong about a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But the thing is that even if you go back to the regular fees, it doesn't solve the problem that people are still going to bid a stupid number and you take over the ledger.
Agreed. But like, if we don't believe in the Dutch auction thing, like one of the things that I mentioned in like my email was like, we could just like chart, instead of like assigning a base fee to different groups, we could just say like, hey, like if you're in certain groups, you actually pay your bid. So instead of being like a Dutch auction, now you become like a first price, I guess like a first price auction basically. And then like that's really punitive basically to people who choose high fee bids. But then if you choose those high fee bids, you are guaranteed to pay them basically. So it avoids that situation where it's like, oh, there's a $1,000 opportunity, you build $900, but you end up paying 20. It's like, no, there's a 1,000 opportunity to pay $900.
Bump transactions, right? So this is one thing that's changed now. So one of the reasons why you might want to have bid a fairly high amount in 2018 is because you were like pre-signing a transaction, right? And now we have a solution to that.
It's not just that, but also like for like clients, like it really avoids having to keep track of market activity, like the activity, like, and especially if you start to say, okay, the predicting fees is basically is becoming even harder. I think you have to have this kind of mechanism.
Well, no, but I mean, what this current mechanism is basically you say the maximum fee, and then whichever validator wins nomination decides how much you actually pay, right? Like that's what this is going on. But it's sort of
right.
Looks like a Dutch auction, kind of, because there's these groups where you're running the Dutch auction. But like, if I can kind of pool people into different groups who are going to end up paying different amounts for the same good, then it's like I might as well just set the price. You know, it seems like it's trying to look like it's still a Dutch auction when it's not. So let's just be more directly what it is, which is validators setting fees per transaction.
No, but it's like saying, oh yeah, like because like validators may decide to not do what we want people to do, then let's throw away the whole thing, right? And make clients as complicated as possible.
No, I'm just saying, like, figure out what we want validators to do and just directly give them that power instead of.
No, but like that's fine. Like we already, like that's the point of this cap, is we give them that power, but then saying we also get rid of the bidding aspect.
Well, validators could decide to run a Dutch auction, right? The point is, if we're giving validators the discretion to set fees, then one of the things they could do is run a Dutch auction. But there's no reason to still have to have Cap 5 somehow wired into the consensus layer. Cap 5 is now going to be a choice.
No, exactly. That's what the Cap 42 already says. There's no more search pricing.
We're running these Dutch auctions per group, which just seems like an inefficient. We're adding this unnecessary level of indirection, right? We're giving validators the ability to set the fee of every transaction, and then we're doing it in this like weird, clumsy bucketing way that is going to require you to like check large sets of integers that they're non-overlapping and all this other stuff, which is just like, why? Just like set the fee per transaction.
But like, how would you resolve contention if it came up? Like if everyone submitted the same kind of transaction all at once and there's contention for ledger space in that situation, how do you decide?
Like it's just highest bid. It's basically the normal
I'm saying a Dutch auction or a first price auction, but just not at the consensus layer. Like it would be the block. The nominator would be the one who's basically setting the fee rules for the block, as opposed to having it happen at the consensus layer.
And like you don't like when I was saying that like we don't necessarily want to do the Dutch auction, I wasn't necessarily saying we don't want to do it for any transactions.
But the point is, Like, there's no reason you can't implement a Dutch auction like as you're nominating a block, right?
But we might want to, like, for certain types of transactions that we think are very benign, we might actually want to mandate it, basically giving clients the opportunity to do very simple fee estimation. And then if you're trying to do something that's very, profit generating, deliberately profit generating, but not otherwise useful, then you have this more complicated fee situation to deal with, and you pay higher fees.
Okay, but if you want to audit that, then it's going to be easier to segregate the transactions, right?
Sure, I'm not opposed to that at all.
We can say, like, I could definitely see a thing where we say, like, at the consensus layer, group 0 is transaction envelope group 0 is going to be not going to allow order book things, and it's going to have to be a Dutch auction, right? And then, like, number 1, group 1 is like discretionary.
Sure, yeah, I would be super comfortable with that. But, like, for me, it just comes back to, like, do we want to do stuff like that? If we want to keep the Dutch auction aspect of it, I think we should probably mandate it in some parts. And if we don't want to keep it, then we should just be honest, like you were saying, and just, like, not even have any pretense of doing it, and just say, like, hey, like, validators, you choose whatever you want. And this is like Cap 42 supports this. Basically, my argument here would be just, like, remove the directions for what you're supposed to do and say, like, do whatever you want.
I mean, like, to mandate it, you have to actually include whatever rule is used for partitioning has to be part of the protocol then.
Exactly. At least for partitioning into that one subset. The rest of them you can do.
Which means that for any change we want to make to this partitioning scheme is a protocol change.
Only to that one partition.
Well, like,
it could be a parameter too. It could be like, a bitmap of the operation types that are allowed in.
Well, yeah, it's like actually the first version of this cap was not. It was not operation type. It was based on which markets you would be doing. So it was on a much more granular. So that's not the type of thing you would want to. You can encode as a parameter. It's.
But those would be the things that aren't in the Dutch auction set.
So basically, like, when you do a path payment, you are not guaranteed to pay Dutch auction or to get the Dutch auction treatment. If you do a simple payment, you're guaranteed to get the Dutch auction treatment.
That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about.
And then, of course, whether or not you get the Dutch auction or something close to it would depend on the particular validator, and that validator could decide it depends on the particular assets that you're touching.
But do we think that changing the fee structure for these kinds of operations, meaning like these the non-super benign, very efficiently implementable operations, would make a big difference? I think that, David, you were already questioning that. Like, is this enough control to discourage those kinds of things or split things up appropriately? Is that right? Like, is the fees the thing that matters? Is the segregation in terms of number of those operations that can enter the transaction set the right thing to control? Like, what is the thing that matters?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, yeah, of course we want to get, we want to, some of this is going to be subjective, right? It's going to be like validators are going to have an idea that there's some stuff that is, more valuable to the network than other stuff, right? And then people creating transactions are going to have some idea of how important their transactions are, which is going to be reflected in the fee or the max fee that they're willing to bid for that transaction. And so I think we like the idea that, if my transaction is really important, I can like pay a lot of money and get it included. This cap doesn't actually guarantee that, right? Because I could bid like a large amount for my transaction, but the validator could, either not include it or could include it in a transaction set with a subset with a low base fee, and then the block that contained my transaction would like compare unfavorably to a block that has like higher fees for other transactions, even though their max fees are lower.
But wait, so that we actually almost never compare blocks.
That's true. That's true. So
and then the first part, that's actually already going to happen today. So I don't.
That's what I was thinking. I suppose there's not really much guarantee that any validator will include your like. You could imagine that, David, you like want to send Justin a payment or something to like close out a payment channel or something, and you're willing to pay like 1 million XLM to do it.
yeah.
But like maybe me and Nico and Tomer are the validators, and we're just like, maybe not. And we just like refuse to include your transaction.
Is that if some validator eventually, if there's some validator willing to do it, and that validator eventually wins consensus, then your transaction will see the light of day.
Yeah.
Right. You need consent. You need some offline agreement, basically, to really censor transactions. And that doesn't change. This cap, I don't think this cap can change that.
It changes it a little. Well, no, I guess not.
Not really. Not any amount that matters,
Yeah.
I think. We have not heard from Lee and not much from Tomer. Where do you guys kind of stand on all of this?
I kind of want to understand. It sounds like David has a much like more simplified approach. I'm trying to understand like from a mechanical perspective what this looks like. What are the protocol changes required, if any, for validators to start assigning random fees or not random fees to transactions? I need to think about this, but I think like David has a point. If we're just like pretending with this like group-based approach, and like we can implement that logic without that. So do we really need that?
I mean, like so the group thing is more like, yeah, like I don't really care. That's more like I said, it's a serialization format problem. Like I think we still have like the new thing. I think the new point that David raised, which is interesting, is should we basically hard code this split that is in the proposal right now as an optional thing? So that should like this split being DEX versus non-DEX. The part I don't know here is that there's like a presumption there that that non-DEX operations or transactions we're not going to need to split that further.
No, sure. Or without going through consensus, sure. I guess right. Put another way, do we feel that for certain kinds of transactions, people should be guaranteed the Dutch auction and the validator shouldn't have discretion?
That's the question I was wondering too, David. And I think Nico thinks the answer to that is yes. I am also inclined to think the answer to that is probably yes. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong that Nico thinks that, but I think he thinks that based on his reaction when we were talking about removing the Dutch auction.
I mean, I like the Dutch that system that you basically express a maximum bid, and then it's the job of validators to try to minimize this for you.
Okay, so this does not currently guarantee that, right? Cap 42. So
well, there is no. I guess like there's no guarantee either, even with the current system, right? Like I could basically decide as a validator, or all validators could decide that they're going to group all expensive transactions in one ledger. I know, that ledger is the stupid ledger, right?
Yeah, at least that is a valid Dutch auction, right? At least that there's 999 other operations that are willing to pay that base fee or whatever.
Right.
But I mean, or you could say like, fine, you don't really have that guarantee because, you know, the validators could hold the expensive operations. But
it's the so I guess like maybe what you're getting at is
this, we're effectively giving validators the ability to just set a different fee for every transaction. Then let's just do that and not like wrap it up in some kind of auction thing.
No, but like, so either, yeah, I mean, like it's, I agree, but like the alternative to this would be to say, okay, like, because your point about, okay, I'm going to have a transaction where I put a fee of $1 million, right? And I mean, as a, as a transaction submitter, I would feel very nervous about this because now if I have a validator that wants to play a joke on me, they can. And they would actually pay nothing. I mean, nobody's actually going, I mean, only that one person is going to pay 1 million.
Right. And that's what Cap 42 lets you do.
So right now, Cap 42 lets you do that. The original version that I wrote was actually requiring that those groups would be of a minimum size to actually avoid this type of situation. But I thought it was maybe not. So basically, you require to do this bidding system on at least some number of transactions. But yeah, I don't know. That would maybe mitigate this, and it kind of makes both versions work in a way. Because now you can have arbitrary sets or arbitrary groups where you do this bidding thing.
I mean, wonder if the right thing, I mean, just kind of break it down that this is not very nice in terms of like how much of the ecosystem it impacts. But I mean, I almost wonder if you want to give you want to give people submitting transactions a choice. So if I had some flags on my transaction, then I could say, hey, I'm willing to, I prefer the validators play with the priority of my transaction, delay it, or I prefer that validators play with the fee that I'm paying or something, right? And so then you'll either, you'll depending on what you select, you'll either pay a potentially very high fee if validators want you to, or you'll get deprioritized if they don't like the fact that it's a path payment or that it's touching some asset that we think is a spam asset.
Yeah, I strongly oppose that idea. I think that we have a problem right now with the Dutch auction where people don't understand it because it's so different from other networks, and understanding, like adding other dimensions to like prioritization besides just fee is just gonna confuse the hell out of people.
Well, what if there's just one bit which says, I want to participate in the Dutch auction or I want to pay this fee? And so then presumably,
yeah, why? I mean, I still don't understand why you would want people to, like, what the current contract with the network is that you put a fee bid and you may pay up to this number. That's the contract. It's fairly simple, I think, to understand. Maybe it's harder to understand when my transaction is going to be included. But at least, you know, the contract is simple.
Yeah, I agree with Nico. I think that like the current contract doesn't have to change even if the underlying mechanism changed. Like basically, this is the maximum amount I'm willing to pay. Maybe if it's for an opportunity, I'm going to pay the whole thing. Maybe it's for something else, I'm going to pay. Like the validators can change the logic without having to have like wallets start like exposing a weird interface.
That's true, but the validators are going to have to make a decision, right? They're going to say like either you're willing to pay a lot, and either I'm going to charge you a lot, or I'm going to charge you the same as everybody else, right? So we're now giving the validators that discretion. And if we think that the Dutch auction is a good thing, and we think that certain transactions should be guaranteed the Dutch auction, I'm not sure I believe this, right? But it's plausible. Like I'm not taking a side. Then maybe make it explicit in the transaction itself, and as opposed to
I don't see how like that you can make it really explicit. I mean, like you have to have a market to for this to work. That's why I was saying like maybe it's more like ensuring that people are actually part of a market when they are doing this bidding, like they expect some bidding. Like, you know, I want to be competing with at least 5 people or 10 people. I don't know what the number is, but like something like that. Can we go back a little bit to this, like if we actually combine the groups and apply order, like make them the same thing? I think this may create, it depends if like how many groups we have, but like I think if we think that people are going to be, if we want people to add more groups over time, doesn't that leave too much? Does that give too much kind of power to validators now that they can control apply order? Right now, that you don't really control that.
Well, I mean, the rules for apply order could go through consensus potentially, or some rules. I mean, so like I could definitely imagine a situation where, like, you know, in the long term, there's like 4 groups. You know, there's SpeedX, there's fast legacy operations, there's slow legacy operations, and then there's like smart contracts.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, so those groups, I understand those groups. I don't understand how inside those groups fees would impact apply order.
Okay, two things to interject here. One, there's actually already a cap about arbitrary transaction orders, so we should probably all review it at some point and incorporate that information into this conversation, because we probably already argued about this like 3 years ago. And since we didn't do it, there probably were some good reasons, so we should learn what we learned back then.
Which cap is it?
Sorry?
I don't remember
Which
that.
cap?
It's 14. It was written by Jeremy. I don't remember what it says either. I just remember it having the word adversarial transaction ordering, and I'm like, ah, yes. I think the word adversarial made this pretty unpopular. But the second thing I want to add is, like, I think probably to make this grouping thing sane, the fees and the groups would have to be on different, like on orthogonal axes. Otherwise, like, this is going to just be a nightmare, I think, Nico. Probably. Okay.
What's that? What's your, sorry, I missed your comment.
Like you were saying, like, how would the fees impact the ordering within the groups, and, like, you know, what about the number of groups and stuff like that? I mean, probably like fees and apply and like phases should be separate kind of grouping or tagging or whatever systems.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't like the idea of mixing the two concepts.
Yeah, I don't think they should be mixed. I think that would be a mess. That'd be really, really complicated.
Right. But like that said,
we could have two systems for it.
Maybe the things that maybe as part of those changes, if we mess with the transaction set, we should make it that it's easy to add more phases, I guess. Even if we're not adding a phase with this change, because we don't have the need for that right now. I think I can see, given that I'm adding this generalized transaction set thing, like maybe it should be easy, yeah, to have phases to it. Right now, I don't think it's that easy, actually, because it's using this index thing. And
yeah.
Maybe I should just ditch that, and then instead it's like you actually have actual vectors and
yeah, I would like that more.
Yeah.
So we are getting close to the hour, and I guess my question is, you know, it seems like there's more to discuss and there's more to think about. What's the best way to move the discussion forward?
I mean, I think there are like a few. So there are like a few interesting questions here. There's the auction system. Like, what do we do with this? And then there's the actual structure of how can we do, what type of groups can exist or not exist outside of the protocol?
So I think there's also work that there's something that doesn't need to go through the transaction layer. I don't know how you guys have like what the current state of this is, but I think that there's going to be some configuration, some way of configuring Stellar Core to say like which transactions we think are, you know, should be prioritized. And so that doesn't need to go through the consensus layer. That's what's going to like, you know, basically implement the discretion that validators have. But having some part of that kind of design sketched out, I think would potentially inform the debate over what the consensus layer, like transaction segregation mechanism should look like.
There is a like a super duper ultra primitive version of that already exists. Super primitive. But I do think it'd be interesting to kind of think about like what could we actually make expressible in a pretty simple way? Because like if there's nothing that's really useful that we can express, then that really lends itself towards saying like, okay, like these things are probably like too complicated to express, they're not configurable, validators won't be able to do it, etc. Whereas if we can think of lots of useful things that you can express simply, then it's like, oh, actually, like we should feel free to give validators a lot of power to make, you know, sane decisions, and they can configure it easily. I think that matters a lot.
I mean, like I guess there are like different things here. There's like, because my, what I thought here, my intent here was not necessarily to make it like something that you would necessarily, you know, do in as a config, right? It's not like a config file that people deploy. I thought it would be more of a, you make actual changes to Stellar Core, and then those things get, you know.
I mean, I think a config file would be better because the point is we
of
want.
Of course, it's better, but it gets a lot more complicated in terms of.
I mean, I realize changing Stellar Core, changing consensus, of course, is easier, right? And we'd rather tell people, hey, you know, because of this thing, like, please compile the, you know, this latest version of Stellar Core, which is still the same protocol version, but that's still pretty heavyweight. So it would be nice at least to rule out that a config file isn't sufficient.
How do you feel about a hook, David? Like what we do for history?
Maybe, yeah.
Because then we could just like basically just like vomit out the set of transactions that we have in memory at your script and say like, hey man, this is your problem, you figure it out.
Yeah, or, you know, it could even be, if we care about efficiency, it could be like a plugin or something, right? That you know, but like, what does it look like? Like maybe the plugin just like assigns a small integer to each transaction, which is its sort of its bucket number or something, and then there's a config file that assigns minimum fees or relations of fees between buckets. But I don't know. Like, and right now I'm just making stuff up. So, but to have at least one concrete design on the table, not an implementation, just a design, I think would make would make it a lot easier to discuss CAP 42 and the various possible changes to CAP 42 in like its concrete context.
I mean, like for me, the other thing that would help me.
That sounds like it's getting into, let's see what type of complicated policy we would want to implement. And
is CAP 42 expressive enough, or is it too complicated for the things that we want to do?
Well, like you mean like which policy? Like I had a previous example of policy in there that I thought was way too complicated in the context of this CAP, because for me, what I want the CAP to be is actually what are the consensus changes, like the things that are really part of the protocol. I don't, in a way, like I want to kind of set aside as much as possible, yeah, like those type of more complicated changes that actually we can do later on, and this doesn't require a CAP.
No, but I mean, I want to know, like, you know, like, for example, I don't know if this is true, but maybe what we want to do is we want to keep track of sort of for each asset, the fraction of failed, you know, path payments that involves that asset. And, you know, and then for when it crosses a certain threshold, we want to, like, you know, deprioritize or raise the cost of transactions involving that asset, or, you know, just, but now I'm just making that up, right? But like, let's have an actual concrete thing of like places where this would be useful and how it would work in Stellar Core. And once we have that, I think it would be easier to say like, well, do we really need cap 42, or would it be simpler just to like set the price for each transaction, or to have like separate arrays that would then also facilitate the phase thing? Because it could be that the phases and the fees for spam should be solved by two totally separate mechanisms, or it could be that like we should have one mechanism and like cap 42 should basically like solve both problems at once. And I actually don't know right now, with like so few use cases, whether we should be doing this as like two separate mechanisms or a single one.
The other thing I'm interested in here is just like, what's our goal? Like, is our goal to have less of these transactions, to have them pay more, to have a better distribution of transactions? What is the thing we're actually trying to achieve? I feel like we'd have more ease agreeing on the mechanism if we all agreed on the thing that we wanted to happen. I don't think we all necessarily have the same picture of what we want to happen. I don't even know if I'm not sure if I even have a picture of what I want to happen. I don't like what's the current situation, but what is the good situation? I don't know.
And that's what I mean by the concrete thing. Like, let's just say, like, here's what Stellar Core could do. Here's a couple of scenarios in which the network's not going to behave well, and here's how it would be solved with this plus some cap 42 like thing. And then we can evaluate.
So you want more examples like the one right now in the cap is we can do groups based on DEX activity. So you want more of that.
Yeah. And I also want to maybe know like how this would be implemented in Stellar Core. Like, again, like config file, change to C++, plug in, like, because is it realistic? Like how often can we get people to like compile new versions of
I mean, we get a new version every month, right? So that's why I'm like, do we need people to go and mess with that more often than that? I don't know, in a super uncoordinated way. I don't know. Like, it doesn't seem super interesting.
People, do we know if people actually do upgrade every month, or just for the new protocols?
I mean, like every at most it's like people like upgrade after like 3 months or something.
Yeah, so like if people are only upgrading like for the new version of the protocol, then there's no benefit to removing this from the consensus layer, or in order to remove it, or there would be benefit only if it could be like done by a configuration file as opposed to like a recompilation, right? But if you're saying like with the protocol upgrades every 6 months and people upgrade every 3 months, like, okay, then maybe there's some benefit.
I mean, like, so validators do upgrade, like keep their nodes up to date. I'm more talking in general. Yeah, like people, the bulk of people takes like 2 to 3 months to upgrade.
There's pretty big variation. Some people upgrade insanely fast. I mean, the CoinQuest guys have occasionally updated before us, I think. But not everybody is so excessively diligent.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Okay, I think we're out of time for today, but I feel like there are some open questions and suggestions for things to sort of work on next. And I feel like ideally we start to bring those to the mailing list and plan to reconvene with some new thoughts, hopefully the next meeting in 2 weeks. Sound good?
Yep.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching out there.